After nearly a decade of devoted service, Prince George's beloved Nanny was quietly dismissed. No press release, no thank you parade, just silence. But what she did next left the palace stunned. Maria Turrion Borrallo, the woman who helped raise the future king, vanished from royal life until she made one quiet move that changed everything. Was it revenge? Or something far more powerful? This is the story the royal family didn't want public, because behind every crown lies a secret. And behind every prince, a woman who helped shape his heart. Let's unravel the goodbye that shook Buckingham Palace to its core. The perfect beginning. In 2014, when Prince George was just 8 months old, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge made a decision that would quietly shape their son's childhood. They hired Maria Teresa Turrion Borrallo, a trained nanny from the prestigious Norland College. At first glance, she looked like any other professional. Neat uniform, calm posture, quiet voice. But what no one outside the palace could see was the level of trust she would soon earn, and the bond she would form with a future king. Maria was chosen not just because she knew how to care for a child, but because she knew how to stay invisible when needed. In a world where every royal move makes headlines, Maria stayed in the background. She kept her life private. No interviews, no leaks. She became part of the palace without ever becoming the story, a palace staffer once said. From the start, her job was simple in theory, but massive in impact: to give Prince George a sense of normal childhood in a world where nothing is normal. Her days began before sunrise. She would enter the nursery quietly, making sure the temperature was just right. She arranged George's clothes, prepared his bottle, and kept his world soft, predictable, and calm. And George responded to her in a way only children can, with deep trust. He laughed when she hummed old Spanish lullabies and reached for her when he was tired. For a baby born into royalty, Maria made his world feel small, warm, and safe. Though William and Catherine were deeply involved as parents, their royal duties often kept them busy. Maria became the steady hand, the one always there, the one who never rushed, never got distracted, never left the room unless she had to. One day, when George was just a toddler, he stood in his playpen and said, "Baba," his first real word. Maria heard it first. She smiled and whispered, "I heard you," softly, as if it were a secret meant just for the two of them. Maria had only just begun, but the foundation she built with George was already unshakable. What came next was a deeper chapter, where her role grew from quiet observer to a constant emotional anchor. Let's step behind palace walls to see what daily life with Maria was really like. Life behind palace walls. Being a royal nanny isn't like any other childcare job. The rules are strict, privacy is everything, and the expectations are sky high. But from the moment Maria stepped into Kensington Palace, she brought something rare: gentle consistency. Her world was filled with small, thoughtful routines. She didn't just care for George physically, she created a world that made sense to him. Every day began with structure: breakfast at the same time, clothes folded just so, favorite picture books waiting on the shelf. George was sensitive to change, especially in his early years. Maria noticed this quickly. If something was different, he would become quiet or ask, "Wow." So she adjusted. She kept his days predictable. She didn't rearrange toys without a reason or change his meals without telling him. "He likes knowing what comes next," she once said to another staff member. And that knowledge guided everything she did. In her care, George didn't have to guess. He could just be. But her job wasn't just to keep things calm. Maria also created magic in small ways. On his second birthday, the official photos showed George smiling brightly. What the cameras didn't catch was Maria, just out of the frame, holding up a soft toy and saying silly words in Spanish to make him laugh. Moments like these were never shared with the press. They weren't meant to be. They were for George. And for her. "He looks at me when he wants to smile," she once told a friend. Inside the palace, Maria didn't speak about the family to others. She respected the line between staff and royalty. But in the nursery, that line blurred just a bit. She wasn't his mother, but she became something quietly powerful. She was the person who knew how to calm him, how to cheer him up, how to let him feel like a child. Her world stayed small and private, but her impact was anything but. And George, even at 2, seemed to understand that Maria was his constant. But what does it take to truly help raise a royal child? Not just feed or clothe them, but shape their emotions and values? In the next chapter, we'll explore how Maria didn't just serve Prince George. She helped shape who he's becoming. Raising a prince. As George grew from toddler to young boy, Maria's role evolved, but her impact only deepened. She wasn't just teaching him how to tie shoelaces or eat with a fork. She was guiding him through the emotional world of being royal. One day, after a rough morning, George stomped into the nursery and crossed his arms. Maria knelt down to his level and asked, "Are you frustrated or just tired?" He paused. "Frusted," he replied. And just like that, she gave him the words for what he was feeling. She believed children needed to feel understood, not just managed. When George asked why strangers waved at his car, she answered simply, "Because they care about your family, and seeing you makes them smile." It wasn't rehearsed. It was honest and gentle. He asked if everyone had beds like his. She told him, "No, not all children do." These conversations weren't part of a lesson plan. They were part of life, spoken in moments most adults would overlook. Maria also brought parts of her culture into George's world. She taught him simple Spanish words like buenos dias and gracias. It became their little secret. On some mornings, George would sneak into her room and whisper, "Buen dias, Maria," proud of remembering. Her songs, her stories, her quiet patience, they all became part of his early identity. He didn't just learn manners from her, he learned empathy, curiosity, and calm. She never sought credit. In public, she stood in uniform, always behind the scenes. But the impact she had on George was impossible to ignore. He trusted her in a way only a child can trust the person who's always there. Maria wasn't just a caretaker. She was his first teacher, his quiet guide through childhood, and the keeper of memories that no royal camera ever captured. "You don't have to speak loud to teach something," she once told a Norland trainee. "You just have to be there every day." And for nearly a decade, she was there. But no role lasts forever. And as George grew, so did the pressure. What happened when the palace decided it was time for change? Stay with us as we explore the moment everything shifted, and Maria's life at Kensington took an unexpected turn. More than a nanny. As time passed, Maria's role went beyond daily routines and early development. She became a trusted presence, not just to George, but within the entire Cambridge household. She understood exactly where she stood. Not family, not staff, but something in between. She never overstepped. But she didn't need to. Her love and loyalty spoke louder than any title. "I'm here for him, not the spotlight," she once said to another palace worker. And everyone respected her for it. Maria didn't seek recognition. In fact, most people didn't even know her name. Yet her fingerprints were everywhere in George's life. She celebrated the big moments in small, meaningful ways. When George turned 5, he had a big royal party. Press, guests, cameras. But later that evening, Maria had her own surprise for him in the staff area. A quiet table with homemade cupcakes and a small toy wrapped in paper. "Did you make these?" he asked. "Just for you," she replied. "Always." She shared the simple moments with him, the ones no one photographed. Walks through the palace garden where George picked up sticks and called them treasures. Rainy days filled with puzzles and board games. Evenings reading next to the fire until he fell asleep on her shoulder. These were the memories that stayed. Not for the world, but for them. She became the keeper of his quiet world, the one place he didn't have to be Prince George. He could just be George. But even the closest relationships must shift as children grow. Maria knew this, even if she didn't say it aloud. Her bond with George was special, but not permanent. She had shaped the early years of a boy born into history, and now, time was moving faster than she wanted. Still, she remained steady, always showing up, always watching with quiet care. "You don't keep children," she once said. "You let them grow away from you." And George was growing. As he started taking bigger steps in public and private life, Maria's role, once essential, began to subtly change. But what does it feel like when that change becomes more than subtle? When the quiet support system you've always known starts to fade? That's exactly what unfolded next. Growing up royal. By the time George turned 7, the nursery no longer looked like a toddler's safe haven. The baby blankets had been replaced with books on explorers, puzzles, and toy planes. The signs of a young boy becoming his own person were everywhere. And Maria adjusted like she always had. She no longer picked out his clothes. She laid out options. She didn't walk him into the room. She walked beside him. The shift was slow, but it was real. George started doing more on his own. He wanted to try tying his tie, packing his school bag, remembering which snacks to take for trips. He wasn't just growing physically. He was growing mentally, more curious, more independent. One night, after attending a royal charity event with Catherine, George asked Maria, "Do all kids have beds?" Her heart paused. "No," she said softly. "Not all of them do." His silence said more than any follow-up question. He was learning to care, to think bigger. Maria continued to adapt, just like she always had. She gave George space, but never disappeared. She cooked meals he liked on quiet evenings, helped with homework when he asked, and stayed close, without crowding him. He still came to her sometimes, asking for help with shoelaces or showing her a drawing. And every so often, he'd surprise her with a little note, usually one word: "Gracias." Their bond hadn't broken. It had simply changed. But Maria could feel it. Something in the air. Something in the pace of the household. More advisors were being brought in. George's education was becoming more formal. Discussions about government, history, and leadership were happening earlier than expected. Maria wasn't in those rooms. Her role, while still valued, was no longer central. She wasn't the guide anymore. She was becoming a background figure. And for someone who had been there for every laugh, every scraped knee, and every bedtime story, that shift was bittersweet. For most families, this kind of change would unfold slowly, almost invisibly. But in the royal world, decisions are made with structure, formality, and timing. And soon, Maria would find herself face to face with a conversation that would redefine her entire place in the palace. Let's now turn to the meeting that changed everything. The turning point. One morning, Maria was called into a private meeting. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but the message was clear. Things were changing. Inside the room were Prince William and Princess Catherine. They spoke kindly, respectfully, thanking her for her years of dedication. "You've helped shape our son," Catherine said, according to palace insiders. "We couldn't have asked for more." But then came the sentence Maria had always known would arrive. "He's at a stage now where he doesn't need a nanny in the same way." George already knew. When Maria walked upstairs after the meeting, he was sitting by the window, drawing. He stood when he saw her. "Mom told me," he said quietly, "I don't want things to change." Maria smiled gently and replied, "You're growing up, and it's time." He didn't cry, but he didn't look away either. That moment, more than any farewell, was the one that stayed with her. That night, she packed up her room. A few books, a framed drawing George made when he was 5, a journal full of memories she never shared. The next morning, she walked him to breakfast for the last time. He gave her a small gift, a leather notebook. On the first page, in George's handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for being my first teacher." She didn't cry then either, but her heart did. She left Kensington Palace that afternoon through the same back steps she had used every day for nearly a decade. No royal statement, no media buzz, just quiet goodbyes and deep gratitude. Her part in the story had ended, or so she thought. But what happens after a goodbye? What does a woman do when the world she quietly helped shape no longer needs her? As we move into the next chapter, we'll see how Maria's story didn't fade. It took an unexpected, stunning turn that would leave the royal world watching. The meeting. Maria always knew this day would come, but when it finally did, it hit differently. The meeting had been brief, respectful, and gentle, but the message was final. The royal household was moving forward. George's development had entered a new phase, and new educators were taking over. Her chapter was done. There was no scandal, no conflict, just a soft, painful shift. "We thought you should choose your last day," William had said. But in her heart, Maria knew it had already happened. After nearly 10 years, Maria was being asked to step back from the boy she had helped raise. A boy who knew how she took her tea, who mimicked her Spanish accent just to make her laugh. She'd been there for his scraped knees, for his sleepy midnight questions, for every whispered gracias. Now she would be watching him grow from a distance, not beside him. It was hard. Not wrong, just hard. Maria didn't argue. She didn't ask to stay longer. That wasn't her style. Instead, she prepared for the end with quiet dignity. She packed only what truly mattered: a framed drawing George had made when he was 5, a small stuffed animal she'd bought during a trip to Scotland, and a notebook filled with memories. Her farewell wasn't grand. It was private, like everything else she had done. The only thing louder than her goodbye was the silence she left behind. That morning, as she walked George to breakfast one last time, they sat together in the same spot they always did. He handed her a small wrapped gift, a leather notebook with his handwriting inside. "Thank you for being my first teacher." She smiled, kissed the top of his head, and said nothing. Because sometimes nothing says more than silence. She left Kensington Palace through the staff door, unnoticed by the world, but unforgettable to one small prince. But what comes next for someone who's given so much, for so long? While most expected Maria to fade into quiet retirement, what she did in the months that followed was something no one saw coming. Let's explore the quiet aftermath that turned into something much louder. Life after Kensington: silence, solitude, and reflection. After leaving the palace, Maria didn't rush into anything. No new job, no media interview, no dramatic headlines. She moved into a modest flat in West London. Nothing grand, just peaceful. Her mornings, once filled with schedules and soft lullabies, were now filled with silence. And for a while, she let that silence be. "Let the stillness teach you," she wrote in her notebook. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a transition, one that required her heart to catch up with her mind. Maria received occasional messages from the palace, mostly formal updates. One message mentioned George had adjusted well to his new schedule and tutors. Another listed a few forgotten items: a cardigan, a child's drawing of a dog. They were mailed back to her without a note. She placed them in a drawer. She didn't cry. She simply whispered, "Gracias," to no one. It wasn't rejection. It was life. And she was learning to let go, piece by piece. During this time, she visited retired nannies and even returned briefly to Norland College for a quiet chat with former classmates. She didn't talk much about the palace, but when asked if she missed George, she simply said, "Of course I do." She kept everything dignified. No gossip, no interviews. Her silence wasn't because she had something to hide. it was because she had everything to protect. George's childhood wasn't a story to sell. It was a gift she had lived through. 3 months later, she received an unexpected call. The palace needed help for 1 week. George was preparing for his first big public trip and had requested familiar support. Maria didn't hesitate. She returned through the back entrance like always. George greeted her quickly, taller now, more grown up. They reviewed his travel needs and routines. Before she left, he handed her a folded paper. On the train home, she opened it. It was a drawing. Another dog, this one labeled Marta. A quiet gift. A quiet goodbye. One final thank you. Her return was brief but meaningful. And while many thought that was the end, Maria had one more surprise left. Something that would redefine how she was remembered. Her next step wasn't dramatic, but it was absolutely unforgettable. Her revenge. For someone who had every reason to walk away in silence, Maria chose a different path, one with purpose. Not revenge in the way tabloids dream of, but something far more meaningful. Instead of fading into retirement, Maria quietly began creating a support program for retired and transitioning nannies. Her mission was clear: to help others move on after letting go of the children they loved like their own. You raise them to walk away from you, she said. But no one teaches you how to walk away from them. She called the project Quiet Hands, a name that came from her days at Kensington. It was what she used to whisper when George got excited or overwhelmed. Quiet hands, George. It meant calm. It meant peace. It meant control. Now, it meant healing. The program offered workshops, support circles, and mentorship for nannies who had lived in the background of powerful families and were struggling to find their place afterward. It wasn't glamorous, but it was deeply needed. Maria didn't use her royal experience to promote herself. She didn't name drop. She never used the word Cambridge. But those who attended knew. They could feel it in the way she listened, the way she nodded at their pain, the way she offered wisdom without judgment. One young nanny said, "She speaks like someone who lived through something beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time." This was Maria's quiet revenge, not through scandal or anger, but through grace. While the palace moved on and George grew into his new role, she transformed her grief into guidance. She turned her goodbye into a beginning, not just for herself, but for others. "I was his first teacher," she often said. "Now I want to help the ones who come next." And while the palace may have turned the page, the impact Maria left behind was written in invisible ink, etched into the soul of a prince, and the quiet legacy of a woman who loved him like her own. But was letting her go truly the right decision? As we step into the next chapter, we'll explore whether the palace may have made a mistake. The royal ripple effect. After Maria quietly exited royal life, the Cambridge household moved on, at least officially. New advisors and tutors began guiding George's days, building him into a young man fit for a throne. His public role grew. More events, more speeches, more appearances. He stood straighter, smiled carefully, said all the right things. But those who knew him best noticed something else. A subtle shift. The natural spark he once had during private moments, it had dulled ever so slightly. Inside palace walls, whispers began. Had they transitioned too soon? Did George lose something when Maria left? She wasn't just another staff member. She had been a constant, an emotional compass. One palace aide reportedly said, "It's like the warmth in the nursery walked out when she did." It wasn't that the new team failed. It was that the bar Maria had set, quiet, deep, and full of soul, was nearly impossible to match. Publicly, George remained poised, but privately, there were signs he missed her. He was seen once carrying a familiar notebook, the same one she had given him with notes and little stories. He didn't speak about her. He didn't need to. The silence said enough. He still visited her memory in his own way, like any boy missing the person who first taught him how to feel safe in an unsafe world. William and Catherine never admitted regret. They made the choice with logic and love. But the emotional side, the part that watched George's quiet stares, his new seriousness, may have wondered. Because sometimes, letting go of someone who's become family doesn't feel right, even when it makes sense. And when that person shaped your child's soul, it's not just a change, it's a loss. But Maria wasn't dwelling on regrets. While the palace watched its future unfold, she was quietly building a legacy of her own, one even more powerful than her presence in George's early years. It wasn't about her job anymore. It was about what she left behind. Let's take a final look at the mark Maria left, not in headlines, but in hearts. A legacy beyond service, Maria's enduring impact. Maria didn't wear a crown, and she didn't need to. Her legacy wasn't written in titles. It was written in moments, in first steps, in bedtime songs, in whispered Spanish words only she and George understood. While the world looked at George as the future king, she saw him as a child, learning how to walk and feel and love. And that's where her greatest impact lived, quietly, in the background, behind the gold-trimmed walls of royalty. Even long after she left the palace, her influence lingered. Teachers at George's school mentioned how emotionally aware he was. "He's kind. He notices when someone's upset," one said. That didn't come from a textbook. It came from Maria, from years of asking, "Are you sad or just tired?" From helping him name emotions instead of hiding them. From showing him that strength can be soft and love can be quiet. At home, George still asked questions she once answered. "Why do people wave at us? Do all kids go to school? Who gets to be in charge?" But now, the voice answering was different. Maria's voice had become part of his internal dialogue. Even in her absence, she was still teaching, still shaping, still holding space in the heart of a boy becoming a man. Maria's legacy was never meant to be public. That was the brilliance of it. She didn't need the spotlight, because her most powerful work was done in the shadows. She wasn't just George's nanny. She was the voice he would carry forward, long after the world forgot her name. And as he grows into his royal role, that voice will remind him, "You were loved deeply, quietly, and forever." And now, as the world watches Prince George grow, perhaps the most powerful part of this story isn't how Maria left, but what she left behind. A drawing, a notebook, a way of seeing the world. And most of all, a childhood that no crown could buy. Let's bring it all together. The goodbye that was never really over. 6 months after Maria left Kensington, her role was officially marked complete. She received one last note, hand-delivered from the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. It was warm, sincere, and filled with gratitude. She read it once, then quietly placed it next to George's drawing of a dog in her drawer. No tears, no grand emotions, just a soft exhale. This chapter had truly closed. But for Maria, some chapters never really end. She continued her work with other nannies, guiding, mentoring, listening. She never boasted about her time with George, never even mentioned the palace. But every lesson she shared, every piece of advice, came from those years. From watching a child grow behind palace walls. From knowing what it means to leave before you're truly ready. Letting go, she told a new nanny once, doesn't mean forgetting. It means believing your love still matters, even when you're not there. And in a way, she was right, because her love did still matter. George, now appearing more often in public, looked poised and mature. But there were small signs, gestures, smiles, a drawing handed to a guest, that revealed he still carried the memory of the woman who first helped him see the world. He didn't speak about her, but he didn't need to. She was already a part of him. Maria's goodbye wasn't loud or final. It was the kind that stays with you, the kind that shows up in the quietest parts of your day. And for George, it would always be that way. Because real goodbyes? They don't erase the past. They turn it into something you carry forward. And now, as we close this story, one thing becomes clear. While Maria walked away without noise, her presence echoes louder than any headline. Let's end with what her journey truly meant, not just to George, but to all of us. The Quiet Guardian. Maria Turrion Borrallo may never appear in royal portraits or stand on palace balconies, but her presence shaped a future king. Her lessons weren't royal doctrine or formal training. They were simple: be kind, listen well, be patient, speak softly, and always, always show up. These values, taught in the quiet corners of a nursery, are the ones that last the longest. She reminded the world that behind the crown, behind the ceremony and tradition, there's a child who needs to be held, heard, and understood. And while titles may change and roles may evolve, those early years, those whispered stories, those soft lullabies, those silent comforts, become the foundation of who we are. George didn't just have a nanny, he had a steady hand, a quiet guide, a guardian of his innocence. Maria's revenge, if we can call it that, wasn't a scandal or a tell-all book. It was something much more powerful. It was leaving with grace, teaching through silence, and choosing legacy over limelight. She showed the world that not all power wears a crown. Sometimes it wears a brown uniform and walks away through the back door, knowing its job was done right. And in the end, maybe that's the real story. Not that Maria was fired, but that she left something behind that no change, no advisor, no future shift in the palace could ever replace. She left a boy ready to become a king, one step at a time. Maria Turrion Borrallo didn't need a spotlight to leave a legacy. Her work was never about attention. It was about presence, about showing up every day, loving without limits, and guiding a little boy who would one day lead a nation. She left without fanfare. But in every step Prince George takes, her influence quietly walks beside him. Her so-called revenge? It wasn't loud or bitter. It was grace. It was building something meaningful after walking away from something precious. She didn't break her silence to spill secrets. She used it to protect what mattered. That's a strength not everyone understands, but everyone should respect. And maybe that's the real takeaway here. Not every story of departure is one of drama. Sometimes it's about letting go at the right time, so someone else can grow into their future. Maria didn't lose anything when she walked away. She gave something: dignity, wisdom, and a reminder that love leaves a mark far deeper than duty. So, what do you think? Should the royal family have found a way to keep her involved? Did they underestimate the power of her role in George's life? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories behind palace walls. And click the next video on your screen. You won't want to miss what happens next. Because in the royal world, nothing stays hidden forever.